So I'm delighted that all of you people had the interest and courage to make it in this rather nasty weather. But I think you will be rewarded by a most interesting talk. And I'm sure the topic, in addition to the speaker, must have attracted you. Because as you well know, Freud was unusually interested in Shakespeare play. He wrote about several of them, whether it's King Lear, whether it's Hamlet, whether it's Macbeth, whether it's Richard III. So he obviously understood, as many other people did, that Shakespeare had a poet's insight into the psychology of men that for analysts had to struggle very hard, but for poets it became very easy. And the title of the paper tonight is Psychoanalysis and the Endings of Shakespeare's Play. Now, for those of you who don't know Dr. Flaxman, just a few things about him. He's a training and supervising analyst, fellow, and faculty at IPTAR, and adjunct professor of Teachers College, Columbia University. He's been the director of theater and drama at Teachers College, where he taught courses on dramatic theory and contemporary theater, which is going to be obviously very helpful in the talk tonight. He currently serves as ombudsman at Teachers College. He's also taught English at Temple University and Baruch College. He's published papers in applied analysis on A Dream of Henry James, so I'll have to ask which dream that was, because I'm now currently involved in The Wings of the Dove of Henry James. And on The Treason of the Cambridge Spies in Psychoanalytic Review. An earlier version of the paper was presented at the biannual meeting of the British Shakespeare Association at University of Stirling, Scotland in July 2014. So it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Dr. Flaxman, and who will then deliver his paper.
Thank you very much. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Dr. Baudry for inviting me to join his Works in Progress group. I also would like to thank Dr. Daniel Berger. Dr. Berger and I sit on adjoining stationary bicycles at the Y, and a couple of months ago, he asked me what I've been doing, and I told him about this, and he brought my ideas to the attention of Dr. Baudry. So depending on what you think of my paper, you will or will not be in favor of aerobic exercise. Let me begin. Several years ago, I attended an informal discussion of Shakespeare's Hamlet, sponsored by the Philoctedy Center here. The speakers were a mix of scholars, theater historians, directors, psychoanalysts, and an actor who had recently played Hamlet in a New York production. Almost everyone agreed that the ending of the play lacked the artistry of the other parts. And as the discussion went on, that in general, Shakespearean endings were a letdown after what had preceded them. The participants agreed that only the ending of the famous Polish production of Hamlet, in which Fortinbras shoots everyone in sight, then clears the stage and closes the play, did the trick. At that time, I was studying lastness in literature and psychoanalysis, as I still am. And as you can imagine, the discussion piqued my interest in the ending of Shakespeare's plays. This paper is a result of some of my thinking. My framework for discussing the endings will be psychoanalytic, because Freud and his followers have provided workable tools for an inquiry into the mind of texts. But I will not try to analyze Shakespeare's mind, nor, for that matter, the mind of the characters in the plays, nor the readers, nor the playgoers' responses. Rather, I am interested in the form and structure of the plays that bring us to their endings. Analyses in plays, I am suggesting, have structures. Dances as well as dancers. In the words of one critic of dramatic closure, they have both a scenic ecology and a psychic ecology. I believe that we should be interested in both, but I am suggesting that reflecting on a play's scenic ecology is a treasured route to understanding its psychology. All drama is based on myths that explain human existence. Western drama began and remains rooted in these myths. Dramatists create fictional forms or paradigms of these stories to make sense of a random, arbitrary, and contingent reality in plays with a beginning, middle, and an end. So a critic watching the play in Tom Stoppard's The Real Inspector Hound, in which the critic himself is a character, can say about it, it has a beginning, a middle, and I have no doubt it will have an end. A play's ending depends on its genre and conventions, and in my reading, the nature of the middle. In psychoanalysis, these middles are moments in a mighty working through process and are influenced by the analyst's own distinctive orientation and technique. Shakespeare's romantic comedies, for example, end with the potential of a new world brought into being by the many marriages that resolve the complications that threaten them. The histories end with a political settlement and a king in place who can rule a stable kingdom. The tragedies end the chaos wrought by the tragic hero's dare, and the romances magically redeem the world. Likewise, ego psychologists end treatments when fantasized primary process thinking becomes realistic, and the ego is enriched by the assimilation of repressed material. Excuse me. For the classical client, sure. Okay, fine. I'm sorry. For the classical Kleinian, in the end, the internalized good object defeats and takes precedent over the internalized bad object through a process of mourning and reparation. And for the self-psychologist, the end comes with the transformation of a grandiose object and with a lessened need for mirror and twinship experiences. But these are ideals. Plays and psychoanalysis end with something excluded, unless they go on interminably, and not even then. Something is always present at the end in the remembered past of the experience and remembered in the future that remains unassimilated and unmetabolized. Judging from his paper, Analysis, Terminable and Interminable, if Freud were to write late in life about the endings of drama, he might have written that some part or engram of the action is unalterable by the ending. A highly libidinized eidetic picture of something in the middle of the play is ever present in the ending, and it is so adhesive that the audience cannot separate from it. The memory of a particular action of a play or a moment in the working through process can be deformed, manipulated, accommodated, and nourished to fit current facts. These are the troglodyte, deferred actions or actions after the fact of drama and psychoanalysis. In discussing the endings of Shakespeare, of plays now, I want to take Freud's statement in Analysis, Terminable and Interminable about a cure as a guide. And this is a quotation which you probably will recognize. He writes, instead of an inquiry in how a cure by psychoanalysis comes about, the question should be asked, what are the obstacles that stand in the way of such a cure? We should ask the same question about the endings of Shakespeare's plays. While they are thought to be right syntactically, logically, politically, psychologically, ethically, and metaphysically, most audiences believe that this is only partially true. The philosopher Karl Popper maintains that it is easy to confirm and verify nearly any theory if one is looking for confirmations. But a particular theory should not count until it is tested. He means that the theory must be falsified before it is accepted. Observation, reason, empirical study, intellectual knowledge, hermeneutic analysis, feelings, fantasy, and the imagination should first be used to prove theories unreliable, to invalidate them, not to confirm them. This was Freud's way in analysis, terminable and interminable, and it will be my method for analyzing the endings of Shakespeare's plays. Simply, I want to argue that by falsifying these endings, or at least questioning them, we can find something at the core of the plays that the endings often obscure. Before beginning, let me briefly review Freud's reasons why psychoanalysis can end only artificially. His explanations will help us frame my arguments about the endings of plays. Freud was pessimistic about the change possible of an ego altered by a profound and traumatic experience in the past. One has to wonder then whether the highly instinctualized action of a particular part of a play so alters the play that the end becomes emotionally inaccessible or distorted. Libido can also lose its plasticity, Freud argued. This means that a highly connected part of a play cannot be easily displaced or absorbed into the ending, no matter how powerfully resolute the ending. And latent thoughts embedded in the drama, like thoughts in an analysis, are not always captured in the ending, although they exist side by side with manifest thoughts. Freud also believed that some psychic forces are immutable. Male patients will resist their desire for passivity, and female patients will insist on maintaining their fantasy of a phallicism associated in their minds with masculinity. But most telling, I feel, for Freud is the destructiveness of the death instinct reaching for entropy. Two instincts drive the action of the play toward its ending. The tension aroused by the play seeks the relief possible through the workings of a pleasure principle that wants the conflict to end. But operating simultaneously is a death instinct that strives for dramatic entropy, a stillness, as the play ends and actors and audiences leave the theater. Many psychoanalysts abjure Freud's pessimism in the termination paper because he was arguing, first, that constitutional factors can make unalterable changes in the ego, and second, and most profoundly for me, that the ontological destiny of the ego can only accidentally alter its phylogenic destiny. Freud is writing directly about the patient's personal and historical unconscious. I am suggesting further, though, that indirectly he is also attributing an unconscious to the treatment itself. In the following discussion, I first present some ideas about the middle of plays, again like moments in the working through process of psychoanalysis. because I believe that they both validate and falsify endings. Many times these middles are the places of considerable unconscious action. Then I want to discuss the particular endings of a few of Shakespeare's plays in order to enlarge my ideas, just as psychoanalytic clinical experiences expand psychoanalytic theory. I want to say at the outset, though, that I do not believe that a play or a psychoanalysis should end by everyone shooting each other, despite the temptation. Although the end of a play or a psychoanalytic session is like a little death, a prelude to dying, a rehearsal for the separation we have feared all of our lives. This section is called Dramatic Endings, especially Shakespeare's. There is a human tendency to look for closure and to perceive things as a whole, with no slidings and mistakes to hinder the recognitions and resolutions we look for in the endings of plays and psychoanalyses. But the concords at the ending of plays, where everything is resolved, are just necessary fictions. In drama particularly, there are also what Roland Barthes calls dilatory spaces, which interrupt the progress of the play. These spaces retard and postpone action. They are often transitional, placed between two moments where the action is fluid and ambiguous. Action in these spaces is indeterminate, but signal something is happening. These moments are like resistances in a psychoanalysis, but they are fruitful and progressive, not just defensive and regressive. Shakespeare's plays are filled with such moments, usually occurring in the middle of the play with their own instinctual and aesthetic intensity. They are frequently extended scenes that create surprising psychic openings in the play. Like moments in a psychoanalysis, they can be particular, telescopic, or regressive to an earlier moment in the play. They can be intrinsic to the horizontal movement of the play, of the action, and yet detachable as well. And they can be both concrete and symbolic, all often at the same time. When we speak of narratives, including dramatic narratives, we think about open texts and closed texts. The action in an open text is flexible and satisfies a wide range of interpretations. Shakespeare's plays are open in the middle. Time in these scenes in the middle of the plays is sometimes synchronic. That is, two actions are occurring at the same time, not just historical. Although moments in synchronic time move the action of the play and a psychoanalysis forward, they have deeper meaning and greater affect than any other moments in a play. They dramatize a present on the stage and something not present. They synchronize moments in synchronic time and move the action of the play and a psychoanalysis forward. They have deeper meaning and greater affect than any other moments in a play. They dramatize a present on the stage and something not present but remembered, and something going on that is not yet known. Synchronized moments are obstacles to a rational closure in the ending of Shakespeare's plays because they raise latent, instinctualized content and thoughts not fully enacted or made manifest. Pardon me? Intense, unconscious feelings and thoughts and these spaces can temporarily disappear as the play evolves. But something that has already been instinctualized exists side by side unconsciously with what has been achieved. For Freud, no psychic formation can be destroyed because it is written in the repression. Shakespeare's endings are filled with the schemata of repressed life that resist organization. And we see only bits and pieces of the repressed material in the concords in the endings of Shakespeare's plays. A closed text with a clear connection between cause and effect, leading to a rational closure, can be very satisfying. But closed texts are artificial, and their absoluteness is an illusion. Textual functioning and psychic functioning are prone to accidents. No matter how much we think we master them, they are not fixed. The playwright and the reader and the audience has to create an ending. But it is a construction, and constructions always have the character of a delusion. Shakespeare's endings. I now want to discuss some of the actions that are left out of or only suggested in the ending of a few of Shakespeare's plays. These residual actions shift the focus of the play, consciously or unconsciously. And as I have said earlier, they have a dual nature. They move the action and retard it as well. After the fact, they are remembered as essential, yet stand alone as little dramas within the master drama. And although they are particular and concrete, they are also symbolic of a larger force in the play. I plan to discuss the endings of some of the middle parts of Hamlet, King Lear, and The Merchant of Venice. I will not always specifically explain the psychodynamic action or apply generalizations about drama to these plays, although I hope they are clear to you when I do not. My purpose is to describe a few moments that we can discuss together as audiences and readers of psychic and dramatic texts. It may seem strange to you that in the following discussion, I will say very little about the main action of the plays and the psychologically towering figures who inhabit them. My interest, I want to remind you, is to question the scenic ecology of the plays, to better understand their dramatic psychology, not to explain the character psychology. Hamlet is the most psychoanalyzed of Shakespeare's characters, and I have nothing to contribute to his analysis. I am more interested here in the psychology of the play than Hamlet's. The play has one of Shakespeare's most conventional endings. As in all Elizabethan revenge plays, Hamlet the Avenger, at the end of the play, fulfills his task by killing Claudius, his father's murderer, as he thought he had earlier when he killed Polonius in his mother's bedroom. In another revenge, Laertes kills Hamlet. Laertes has been egged on by Claudius, who wants to rid Denmark of Hamlet, and has convinced him that Hamlet is responsible for Ophelia's death. Even Gertrude must die of poisoning for her mild sexual transgressions, it would seem. Hamlet enjoins Horatio to, quote, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story, end of quote. Hamlet tells him to bear the pain of being alive and possibly not to commit suicide in order to tell the world about Hamlet. But right before he dies, speaking to Horatio, Hamlet says, quote, Had I but time, oh, I could but tell you, but let it be. End of quote. What then is Hamlet's story? We know that Hamlet always has to explain and repeat himself to try to find an exit from the closed boundaries of his life, especially in his soliloquy. Pauses in the horizontal movement of the play. But what else would he tell Horatio? He might tell him what it is like to live one's own life and the life of someone else's in a previous time, synchronically, in a drama of generational, erotic, and aggressive trauma. A subject latent in Hamlet and in many psychoanalyses, I might add. To at least try to discern Hamlet's story, we must look for parts that are not resolved or homogenized in the ending. Starting with Fortinbras, who is brought on stage at the end to sort out the bodies and assign funeral rites and clean up the mess. His story has been going on along with Hamlet's throughout the play, and now it takes over. In the 1989 production, Hamlet 4, directed in Poland by Andrzej Wajda, mentioned at the beginning of this paper, Fortinbras speaks the last words of the play. Then the audience claps and starts to leave the theater. Abruptly, Hamlet gets up and leaves the stage, and we hear trumpets and drums and Claudius's voice. And then the members of the audience return to their seats. Fortinbras goes behind a screen and then reappears in the costume worn by Hamlet in his first appearance in the play. He is chewing on a straw, standing in the front of the stage. Claudius and his court come downstage to meet Fortinbras, now Hamlet, who repeats Hamlet's first words in the play about seeming and being. But now, Fortinbras / Hamlet stalks upstage, pushing through Claudius and his party as the lights go out to the sound of guns. The play, like a psychoanalysis, can begin again, seemingly incomplete, before, in a new register, after the first version has been destroyed by gunfire. Fortinbras now is the hero of the play. But it's no longer a tragedy. In a Marxist view of history and the drama it imitates in this production, Fortinbras destroys the past and the present, which likely will have to be destroyed again in the future, when it too becomes a prison. Fortinbras is Hamlet's shadow, a second action throughout the play. The aggression that Hamlet's reasoning mind represses. Listen to Fortinbras' soliloquy in the Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert's elegy of Fortinbras, speaking to Hamlet. You had to perish, Hamlet. You were not for life. You believed in crystal notions, not in human clay. Always twitching, as if asleep, you hunted chimeras. Now you have peace, Hamlet. You accomplished what you had to, and you have peace. The rest is not silence, but belongs to me. You had the easy part, an elegant thrust, but what is heroic death compared with the eternal watching with cold apple in one's hand on a narrow chair with a view of the anthill and the clock's dial? And the poem ends, it is not for us to greet each other or bid farewell. We live on in an archipelago. And that water, these words, what can they do? What can they do? What can they do, Prince? The elegy finds the point of the play's silent movement. Words have worth in the mouth of an introspective prince with an addiction to philosophy, but not for repairing sewers in rotten Denmark. This is the second ending of the play, Hamlet, which now could be called Fortinbras. Hamlet opens with a question, who's there? The sentinel coming on guard asks the question. By custom, it is the sentinel on duty who should challenge someone approaching his watch. Something is turned around here. We quickly learn that the who they are watching is the ghost of Hamlet's father, whom they all have seen and now want to inform Hamlet about seeing it. As an Elizabethan Protestant, when Hamlet sees the ghost, he has to question the presence of an apparition from a Catholic purgatory. And the question makes him giddy. Who's there? Hamlet never knows for sure. The ghost appears twice to Hamlet, once at the beginning of the play, when it is seen by others, and in a second appearance in his mother Gertrude's bedroom, when only Hamlet sees him. And this time, the ghost might even be a different ghost. Earlier, he was dressed in full field marshal's uniform. Thank you. But now, most likely, he is dressed in his night clothes. And the play is different now, too. Hamlet's encounter with his mother is a scene in a somewhat different way. One where a Puritan preacher is haranguing a sinner for her lasciviousness, demanding repentance and abstinence, not a son speaking to his mother in the play Hamlet we have been watching so far. The scene has the character of a medieval morality play in the middle of an Elizabethan heroic tragedy. This part of the play takes on its own life, with a different Hamlet than elsewhere in the play. The play tries to incorporate several random actions with their own dramatic cathexes. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are brought into the play to amuse the prince as Claudius's pawns. They die when Hamlet substitutes them for himself to thwart his own murder. They become changelings. They take Hamlet's place the way children in medieval and Elizabethan dramas were removed from their cradles and another child was placed there. In a variation of a family romance, Hamlet avoids his destiny by acting if he belongs elsewhere, to other parents, so to speak. Hamlet returns to Elsinore after he has substituted Rosencrantz and Guildenstern for himself and is saved by pirates. The Elizabethan pirate world was lawless and hypermasculine, populated by men with no attachment to society. They likely also practiced homosexual sex, or at least women had no part in their lives. They are now in the play, although unseen, an unlikely part of Hamlet's story. Hamlet's encounter with the pirates is narrated in a letter to Horatio, not dramatized. For many, it is just a plot device. But this narrated interlude has changed Hamlet, who no longer sees himself just as an avenger. In the subsequent action, Hamlet engages with the gravedigger about the passage of time, and with Laertes and Ophelia's grave about who loved Ophelia more. Hamlet then goes to his fencing duel with Laertes and his own death, with this conventional thought about living and dying, spoken to Horatio. There is no special providence in the fall. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he knows aught, what is it to leave betimes? let be. I should tell you in passing that it's almost impossible to type this. And I would suggest that's significant, as I'm going to suggest. Harold Jenkins, a modern editor of the play, raises and dismisses the idea that this speech answers the question about living and dying that Hamlet asks in the to be or not to speak, to be or not to be speech. The commonplace blend of stoicism, the readiness is all, and Christian humility, there is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow, here is written to be spoken in prose, conversationally, not in the poetry of Hamlet's speech throughout the play, including the to be or not to be speech. Where is Hamlet now? We might ask. Hiding himself in this speech, I might answer. The longest section of Hamlet are the scenes of Hamlet's advice to the players and their performance of the play, The Murder of Gonzago, which shows the horizontal movement of the action as it intensifies it. This sequence is a play within a play about acting. A play within a play is like a dream within a dream that the dreamer defensively dreams to protect herself from knowing the meaning of the master dream. Here, a play about acting is enacted by actors in a theater. This may be why Laurence Olivier's performance of Hamlet, is so memorable to many people. Olivier was an actorly Hamlet. He was both the character Hamlet in a play, character Hamlet, and an exhibitionist actor playing the role of Hamlet. Everyone in Hamlet is a character in a play, their own and someone else's, especially Ophelia, poor Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and Hamlet himself. The play Hamlet is all theater, with earth-shaking problems solved by actors. I will leave to you, and hopefully our discussion, to help explain the place of this play within a play in Hamlet. King Lear, the play I want to discuss next, like many of Shakespeare's plays, also has a mechanical ending. After clearing the stage of Goneril, Regan, and Edmund, the Duke of Albany, the most royal of the survivors, who should inherit the stage now, strangely turns the rule of the kingdom over to Kent and Edgar. Kent leaves the stage to go to his death. He has lived too long and seen too much, and the kingdom is left to Edgar. Edgar has been the link between all the characters in the play, but the one who has been least touched by the action, like Fortinbras in Hamlet. At the end of the play, Shakespeare contracts the action and leaves the characters and the audience to speak what we feel, not what we ought to say, in the words of Edgar. But King Lear, the play, has a spiritual ending as well as a mechanical ending. In Lear's last words, speaking about Cordelia dead in his arms, quote, "Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there," end of quote. At the moment of his death, he believes that Cordelia is alive. The poetry of the line, coming only a few lines after Lear's devastating, unchristian, nihilistic, never, 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 reaches metaphorically to an unrecognizable world where the there is. We could say that Lear speaks this line in a moment of ultimate dread and beatific serenity, in the language of James Grotstein explaining Bion's concept of the O, a transcendental experience of an absolute reality without contingencies. The globe, one of Shakespeare's theater was referred to as the wooden O. Or more domestically, it could only be Lear's way of escaping the pain of living delusionally. Some critics question whether we can ever know what Lear is seeing, because the line of the verse is so open-ended. Looking can entail many acts of perception, fantasy, and imagination, and there can be anywhere. The play ending on this note is a challenge for theatergoers and analysts alike to know what Lear sees and wants us to see. There is an extended scene in King Lear where the action is distinct and stands alone. Edgar, the agent of a life outside the play's tragic reality, in Act 4 leads his blind father, Gloucester, who does not know that Edgar is his son, to a place that Gloucester believes to be the edge of a cliff over which he wants to throw himself. However, it is only a flat plain. Here we have the pretended mad leading the literally blind. Edgar complies with Gloucester's wish, but first describes the common, non-tragic activity of the life in miniature below to the blind Gloucester, although it is a fiction that Gloucester can only see in the eye of his mind. Edgar steps aside, and Gloucester falls on his face. The references to seeing or looking are dialectical in the play. But does Edgar's describing a there at the bottom of a cliff to Gloucester just forecast or parallel the tragedy of Lear's plea for others to look? Shakespeare just adds a scene of poignant realism here to a cosmic tragedy, I believe. I want to consider The Merchant of Venice next, that strange romantic comedy. The play is structured like a diptych. One panel, so to speak, depicts the world of Shylock's Venice. The other portrays Portia's Belmont. They only converge when Portia comes to Venice to drive Shylock and his world out of the play. By acting like a Shylock the Venetian, by asserting legalistic justice after Christian mercy fails to convince Shylock not to literally ask for a pound of Antonio's flesh. Shylock's Venice is the world of literal mindedness, anality, repression, hatred, otherness, difference, Jewishness, Old Testament justice, and so on. Portia's world is a world of metaphor, magic, prodigality, love, generation, belongingness, similitude, Christianity, New Testament mercy, and so on. Shakespeare's aesthetic sympathy, likely inadvertent, though, is for Shylock, the play's negative force. The audience is fixed on his presence, even after he is forced to convert and leave the stage. It is not just that the character of Shylock has become the lightning rod for historical anti-Semitism, but rather that he triggers the action in the beginning of the play, becomes the source of the crisis and complication in the middle, and is a shadow on the future of the lovers at the end of the play. Shylock's voice is still a dissonant sound in the harmony of the romantic world, conventionally symbolized by the music of the spheres and the last act of the play after Shylock has left it. Portia makes the right request of the assembled lovers, all of whom have been part of the Shylock action, when she says at the very end of The Merchant of Venice, quote, "Let us go in and charge us there upon interrogatories, and we will answer all things faithfully." Antonio, the merchant of the title of the play, is left alone on the stage among paired lovers at the end of the ending of The Merchant of Venice. Bassanio, his friend, has abandoned him in order to marry Portia. Antonio earlier had become indebted to Shylock to help Bassanio, motivated by homoerotic love. Almost all of Shakespeare's romantic comedies leave someone out of the new world of the actual and symbolic multiple marriages at the end, notably Malvolio, who vows to return to take revenge on the lovers in Twelfth Night. Theatrically, the play is not over yet. The actors reappear on the stage after they have left it, paired in a graceful dance-like movement, but now they are out of character to dance a jig with each other, making low, comic sexual gestures. But the spirit of Shylock remains even after the jig is finished. The play has tried to submerge objects like a Shylock, deeply embedded in the unconscious, by annihilating or disconnecting them from everything else. Shylock, like the ghost of Hamlet's father, is from another country. Both are highly eroticized, uncanny objects that audiences are left with, and whom the plays defensively alienate. Perhaps this object is the who of Hamlet and the what of King Lear. Shakespeare's plays have different, this is the conclusion, Shakespeare's plays have different endings. So do psychoanalyses, and no one ending is the model. Hamlet, with its many unanswered questions, can only end conventionally and mechanically. King Lear has to end Lear's unbearable suffering so the play can end. The Merchant of Venice can only end by cutting away some of its parts. I could go on. The Tempest, a play that is all ending, ends in an epilogue with Prospero not knowing what to do next. Troilus and Cressida, which is all middle, never ends, except by everyone being cursed, and the winner's tale ends by faith in white magic. Speakers usually end their papers with a summary or draw a conclusion, but my doing so would violate the spirit of the paper. So I want to leave my ending open for our discussion. The coda of this paper, moreover, belongs to Shakespeare. He should have the last word. I quote from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra from the middle of the play, not the ending. Lepidus, a member of the Roman ruling triumvirate, which includes Antony and Octavius Caesar, in a dilatory space in the play, asks Antony about the nature of a crocodile in the Nile. To satisfy Lepidus' curiosity, Antony answers, "It is shaped, sir, like itself, and broad as it has breadth. It is just so high as it is, and moves with its own organs. It lives by what nourishes it, and once out of it transmigrates." Then Lepidus asks, "What color is it of?" And Antony answers, "Of its own color, too. 'Tis a strange serpent," says Lepidus. And finally, Antony says, "'Tis so, and the tears of it are wet." Thank you for listening.
Even though you said that you did not want the end to the paper, you've piqued my curiosity when you quoted the passage from Hamlet, because as I was rereading it, I had no idea what he's getting at, and perhaps since you've thought about it some more, let me read the passage again. "There is a special providence in the fall of the sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all." Could you explain what Shakespeare is playing with?
I think that Shakespeare, I'm going to see if I can say this without insulting Shakespeare. I think it's a conventional ending. I think it's a standard way that people did talk about how to live a stoic Christian existence. What's interesting about it is, though, which is, and one never knows how conventional this speech was, because a lot of what we consider grossly original in Shakespeare really is quite commonplace, including, for instance, the 7 stages of man in As You Like It. What I think he is doing here, though, is ending the play, and he doesn't know how else to end it. It's very standard in Shakespeare's plays, especially the tragedies, to resort to facing Christianity and the influence of Stoicism. What, though, is interesting, if it is original, is how filled with little paradoxes and ironies and repetitions. I basically don't know. I do know that it's in prose, which is not the best guide for understanding Shakespeare's, although the clowns and the fools mostly in Shakespeare speak in prose, except the Lear and Hamlet, except the fool and Lear. I don't know, as I don't know about a lot of things in Hamlet, obviously. I think the degree to which, as I said comically, it's so difficult to type and very often difficult to speak very quickly, does suggest a certain amount of, let's get this over with.
Okay. Now, before turning the question to the audience, I have one more question. If I understood correctly this very wonderful paper, you're making an analogy between the process in a psychoanalysis and with the beginning, the middle, and the end. In the end, there are things that are left unresolved.
Yes.
And you're trying to say that somehow the construction of a play reminds you of the process of an analysis. There, I have a little question I wanted to push you a little bit, because what you're implicating is that the process of the play is similar to a psychoanalysis, because one would have to spell this out a little bit more clearly, because you talk about the instinctual forces in the play. So it's not clear to me whether you think that the author himself is not quite in charge of the play, that there's both a conscious and an unconscious, that there's a conscious of the text and an unconscious of the text, and therefore you're talking about, let's say, certain latent structures in the middle of the text that for complex reasons are not entirely resolved, and that this non-resolution somehow colors the way the plays end. Did I understand this correctly?
Yes, I wish I had written that, actually.
Okay. Now,
but listening
okay. To what you had to say about Hamlet, if you could just clarify a little bit how this Hamlet illustrates this thesis, because I wasn't quite sure I could follow the intricacies of what was the issue in the middle, what was not resolved, and how it comes up in the end. This would, I think, help clarify for the audience how we can continue the discussion.
Let me say that in retrospect, I really should have been much clearer, that I was using the idea of the path of a psychoanalysis, and by implication, possibly the open-endedness despite the closure of a psychoanalysis, mostly as an analog. I wasn't suggesting they're identical. Most people who have heard or read the paper have the same response. So I think I did fail to say there's something very suggestive about the comparison. I do want to say that. Shakespeare, Hamlet, and many of Shakespeare's plays, except Macbeth, tend to be filled with all kinds of action that expand what's going on, go on to something completely different. Mostly the comedies where you have a substantial double plot. Hamlet itself raises enormous questions, and not only raises it in the poetry and the thought of the play, but in the action. For example, Hamlet does end ends with Hamlet avenging, but along the way, halfway through the play, the whole question of Hamlet as avenging the murder of his father falls off. After he kills Polonius in the end of Act 3, the play turns to other matters, including Ophelia's death. The whole subject of Ophelia, who drops out of the play as a character when she commits suicide, except for the illusion where Ophelia becomes a tool for Laertes and Hamlet, in Lacan's words, fighting over their jouissance when they jump into the grave. What happens to Ophelia drops out of the play. She is the creature and the vessel for everyone else's dynamics. Her father, her brother, Claudius's, Laertes, and Hamlet himself. As a matter of fact, one never really knows whether Hamlet loved her. You never see any time. Anyway, these are the kinds of things that I think don't get absorbed in the ending. The largest sense of what doesn't get absorbed is what I think is the center of the play, the advice to the players. You have a play that opens up questions of, which is in the speech, of what's real and what's not real, which is never addressed in the ending. It drops out. But for all of what Hamlet's concern, it's dramatized dead center in the play, in the longest part of the play, and it never gets integrated. Now, my argument is they're highly instinctualized moments. And what I mean is, this is going to be a leap, they're aesthetically fascinating to Shakespeare. In many parts of these plays, what interests him or what he thinks will please his audience begins to take over. My argument is what we call as something being of a aesthetic intensity tends to be, and I say this with some trepidation, highly instinctualized. We argue quite correctly that anything that is aestheticized is a function of secondary process thinking, and one would argue overcomes what's instinctualized, but I don't think it's possible. I think one is actually, if I can go so far, I always kind of question whether you ever really do neutralize an instinct or totally sublimate it. In any case, both I think affectively and instinctually, thought-wise and pure dramatic interest, some things come into the play that are shoved under, that never arrive at the very end, except the play has to have an ending. As the critic says, a play has to have a beginning, a middle, and no doubt it's going to have an ending.
Yes, questions from the audience. Comments? Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's really, I mean, we tend to see, let me put it this way. There's no question that the Oedipal myth is the your structure, structure of the play. But if you look at the play Oedipus Rex, you see Oedipus's problem is to redeem his father's mistakes. His father has run away, kidnapped, and sodomized the son of his host. He's defied the oracle's orders, and he has to pay. But Oedipus is the one who pays for it. So I'm arguing that, and by the way, there probably, and I think there was, a play called Laos. We have a situation where Hamlet has to fulfill his father's project. The device that opens the play is the ghost saying, you have to, and for me to get out of whatever situation I'm in, which seems to be purgatorial, for me to rest, you're going to have to avenge my death. Hamlet, that's his father's problem, not Hamlet's problem. So what we have is, it seems to me, generations of Hamlet living his own life and living the life of someone in a previous generation. And as I say in the paper, they go on at the same time. But I go further and say it's all laced with a kind of a combination of eroticism and aggressiveness. The other part of it is, this is a play about fathers and sons, or fathers and children. Fortinbras and his father, Laertes and Polonius, Hamlet and his father. You could make an argument for this play has to do with the vicissitudes of one generation following another generation. Now, I think that's subtle in the play. On the surface, it's not always talked about. That's what I meant.
But also fathers and sons is also the core of Macbeth, isn't it? And it's also the problem also in King Lear.
Yes, there's no question, but I think if we stood back and looked at the history of drama, that almost every drama in one way or another is Oedipal. I think it was sufficiently in Shakespeare's mind because there was so much political chaos with one faction or one group trying to overthrow another group. So you begin to see it in a lot of Shakespeare's plays and in a lot of related plays.
Yes, please.
Well, I think you say a number of things. What I guess I'd like to, if I can answer it sideways. I think that you have multiple realities and multiple time schemes in analysis. I think less so in a play, but even in a play, you're dealing with multiple realities. What I mean when I talk about synchronically. And I talk about in the stage, which I don't talk about in Elizabethan stage, one set of characters goes on the stage and another set of characters leaves the stage. So you have this, and they have their different preoccupations and their different projects. So I do think that goes on in an analysis. I do think also when the analysis is finished, there is a kind of a closure to the analysis. But closure doesn't erase what goes before. As a matter of fact, Freud does say, you can't undo a psychic formation. I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, I suppose the analysis does go on. Look, the analysis goes on, the analysis begins, somehow the preoccupations that we have before we go into analysis exist. How they are worked out in the analysis, and they go on afterward. I mean, I think, now there is a certain segment, the analysis itself is independent of the flow of life. But I don't think it necessarily, I think it finds an ending, a reasonable ending, but it's by no means the ending of the issues that were in the analysis. They're just characterized differently. Or let's say in drive theory, the distribution some parts of it become de-instinctualized, some instinctualized.
But I think there may be a problem in analogizing the end of the play with the end of an analysis, because a patient who's in analysis, once the analysis is completed, he continues his life. Whereas a character, once the play ends, they don't continue, except in your thing of the Polish thing that may have been the point, that somehow people felt they had to continue the story. So there is a problem. On the other hand, it is possible to look at a play as an extended analytic hour. That it is the creation of the artist's mind, and so there's a process by which the artist creates the play. And so you can think of the unity of the play as reflecting the unity of the artist's capacity for imagination and capacity to. So there you make comparisons, but you have to be careful not to push the comparison too far. Dan, do you want to say something?
If I may join into your comment and to Frank's, I'm always struck by that we come back to see the same plays over and over again. That if there is something that resembles closure, and there is, we do leave the theater, and as I suggest in the paper, even if the dramatist doesn't put closure in, although Beckett challenges this considerably, you do have to find some closure. You have to leave the theater. You can't just sit in the theater. You have to get up and leave. But we go back to certain privileged texts, like Shakespeare's, to repeat the situation. So although I think we have closure, and I want to timidly suggest that there may be something of that in analyses. After all, people do go back for the second and third, although they deal with different issues, or they deal with the same issues differently. But this imperative to repeat the experience. Now, obviously, there's pleasure in having the experience beyond the imperative to have it again. Now, one of the reasons, if I can go to your comment, Danny. One of the reasons I quoted the section from Antony and Cleopatra is there's no ambiguity in that. It is what it is. That's what I think is quite interesting about why I guess it doesn't, well, when Anthony says, look, you might be curious about the nature of the crocodile, but frankly, it's its own color, etc. And its tears are wet. What that is I suppose, a challenge to. Now, of course, I must say, in all fairness, Anthony is trying to blow off Lepidus there. He doesn't really want to pay much attention to him, especially because he's going to get rid of him soon. But there is that statement, which I think is a new way to look at Shakespeare, that what it is what it is, and the accretion of interpretation we have, which is Popper's point, needs to be questioned.
But you see, I would agree with that, and I would say one more thing, that in a play or a novel or a movie, an ending is always artificial, and it is required by the author, and in fact there are a variety of endings, and Henry James, that I happen to be working on now, has wonderful ending in his novels because they're often very ambiguous. And so there's on the one hand the thirst for a conclusion, on the other hand, this is an artificial aesthetic requirement.
Mm-hmm.
But so if a play or a novel is ambiguous, I think it stirs our interest because it leaves us continuing to think rather than, oh, well, they got married and
Mm-hmm.
lived happily ever after.
Mm-hmm.
Which is generally a phony ending, which is
Mm-hmm.
required by Hollywood, but is not really part of life.
Well, the quotation that I began, the epigraph for the announcement of this is the one from Henry James. By the way, it's a mistake. It's not from Roderick Hudson. It's from the preface to Roderick Hudson, where James says, "Look, we have to find an ending." I mean, I think he recognizes that he's opened things up, and the ending may not be congruent with the action. But he does say we have to end. The role of the artist is to end. Yes.
Yes, please.
I was thinking about that. It seems to be a spoken which has a really long play. And I directed the play recently. We were trying to figure out what to do because here's Malcolm, things are charming and everything's delightful, and then your duck comes on, he's got that's head and he flops down the middle of the stage, which seems to me very much the point of what we've been talking about, the return of this,
Mm-hmm.
this monstrous thing, even more monstrous thing, into what ought to be a better future. Somehow, it really makes very clear that whatever kingdom is going to come is predicated upon, is founded on this violent act. And I think to a certain extent, Shakespeare has a luxury that he's taken in, he has to end his plays. He has to kill off his characters if he wants to. We don't get to kill our patients.
That's right.
Or each other. But I wonder then, is it possible that we need, as therapists, to resist the urge that we see in Shakespeare? That in his tragedies, he moves us forward by destroying the past. Claudius badly gets killed, and so someone more innocent becomes one of the others. Hamlet doesn't, Fortinbras doesn't have to. So yeah, I guess what I'm asking is, do we have a responsibility to resist this temptation that we see in Shakespeare's plays, to create a phony resolution? Do we need instead perhaps to help our patients and maybe ourselves to deal differently with villains, deal differently with the character, that we're part of ourselves perhaps, that we might find
Well, I think I would just take your last words as I think what one reaches for at the end of an analysis. And what guides us all is to live differently and see things differently and open up more possibilities that may have been closed off because of certain character problems or neurotic problems. I don't think we want to, first of all, I think even if we were grandiose enough to think we could destroy something, it would be very, very dangerous, although I want to talk about that in a second. Our role is really to provide opportunity, freedom. I once spoke to a beloved supervisor and suggested to him that the goal of my doing analysis is to provide freedom for the patient. And he looked at me and he says, "Do you really believe you ever achieve that goal?" But I do think it's what we attempt to do, to provide more opportunity for the patient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gene, would you like to say something? Eugene Goldberg? Yes.
Well, what I, if I may say, I think one thing, and it may speak to your point. I think Shakespeare, what we forget, was a very popular playwright. He provided what his audiences would like, and I tend to think, and you're saying he sees what he sees, and he provides what they like. I think the analog is analysts analyze where their patients are, what their patients need, what's going to help the patient, despite any kind of, well, along with all kinds of orientations. So if I can take the word, take the thought, Shakespeare is a popular dramatist, providing what his audience need and want, including a lot of assurance that this nation will be stable in all those political problems, that the metaphysical problems that they suffer from as human beings, the ontology, are workable. The parallel is the stance of the analyst. The analyst this is the notion of what will help the patient, despite the danger of coming to treatments with one's own orientation and one's idea of what will help the patient.
Well, it's about 10 o'clock, so I think we want to thank Dr. Flaxman for a wonderful presentation and making us really think hard about endings of analysis and endings of Shakespeare's play. Many thanks for
Thank you.
all of
Thank
you
you
coming.
Thank you for the invitation.